Thank you for selecting these SsangYong e-learning videos. This is a short video to show how to safely discharge the high voltage system on the SsangYong Korando E-motion. As you can see, our workshop area has been secured with high voltage signing and a high voltage chain, as well as the rubber mat at the rear, which you can see that we'll use later when disconnecting the service plug. As I pan around, you will see that we have a red attention high voltage active with fault present sign on the windscreen to ensure that everybody knows this vehicle is still live. And you can see the chain that we've brought around the vehicle encompasses the whole of the working area to ensure that no one walks in accidentally. Our technician has removed all of his jewellery to ensure that he does not get electrocuted, and he'll now secure the vehicle key in a locked cupboard 2 meters or greater away from the vehicle. He's just locking the cupboard so that nobody can accidentally grab it. He's now going for a check of his PPE, so he's got his high voltage boots, eye protection, as well as class 0 high voltage gloves, which he's now going to perform a pressure test, which should be done before every use of these gloves. You'll see as he twists them up, he's checking to see if any air is leaking out of the palms or fingertips of these gloves, and he'll do this on both gloves before ever placing them on his hands. So those are both proved okay, and we know they are safe to use. We're now going to raise the bonnet before putting them on to prevent any damage to the gloves. Just secure the bonnet in there safely. And before putting the high voltage gloves on, we're going to do an inspection of all of the high voltage cables, just to make sure that we can't see any clear and obvious short circuits or damage to the cables. On this vehicle they are coloured orange, but some may be yellow or other bright colours. We've performed our visual inspection. We're happy with this. You just see my check sheet there, which can be downloaded from the SsangYong dealer portal. And we're now going to move on to disconnecting the 12-volt battery. So we'll disconnect the negative terminal of that battery, just using a 10mm spanner. Disconnect that and drop that down behind the battery so it cannot accidentally reconnect. And then we'll go over to the interlock connector down by the coolant bottle here, which is another 12-volt circuit, so we don't need the gloves. And we'll disconnect that to ensure that all of the high voltage relays are 100% disconnected. So we'll keep hold of this for now, but as we move around the vehicle to disconnect the service plug, once that has been disconnected, we'll lock the interlock connector and the service plug away. So on this vehicle, the service plug is here in the rear underneath this metal cover, which is held down by 4 10mm bolts. We're using an insulated 10mm nut driver just as precaution, and our technician has the high voltage rubber mat underneath his feet, as well as his high voltage gloves, just in case there's any issues. Better to be safe than sorry. So we'll now remove the plate cover. It's just prying up with a little screwdriver, and there you can see the service plug. So you can see the tab on the front, which needs to be lifted up. And then the black interlocking arm has to be brought up to about 100 degrees. And then there is a small tab underneath, which you'll see in a second as I bring the light round. So you press that in with your finger and lift the whole tab up, and that is your service plug disconnected. We'll now have to cover this service plug just to ensure that nothing falls into it by accident and reconnects the high voltage pins. And then we'll take the service plug and the interlock connector and we'll put them in the same locked cupboard as the vehicle key. So our technician's just locking all of that away. And as we go through this process, we're ticking off the check sheet that's available to download from the SsangYong dealer portal. And we now have to wait for 5 minutes for the high voltage system to discharge completely. It's now been 5 minutes through the power of video editing, and our technician has his high voltage multimeter, which we have set to volts DC. He's now grabbing his rubber mat to ensure that he has an insulated mat underneath his feet whilst he's working. And we're looking for the main battery connection terminal, which is this one here, located on the rear. And we're going to disconnect that, ensuring we still have all of our PPE on. So that is the main power from the high voltage battery into the inverter. It's now disconnected, and before we do any checks, we'll prove that our multimeter is operating correctly across the 12-volt battery, which you can see has 13 volts. So we're happy our multimeter is operating correctly, and we'll go across the 2 pins in the battery connector, which are showing 0 volts. So we know that there's no power coming from the battery up to the vehicle. And we're now just testing again, proving our multimeter is okay. So we know that from the battery to the engine is okay, but we could still have high voltage within the engine itself or motor, or within the DC-DC converter, the inverter, or the onboard charging system. So we now have to prove that the rest of the system is safe. So you'll see we're going to go into the male pins of this connector and just check to see if there's any voltage here. So there are 2 pins in the back side of this connector, and as you can see from the multimeter, there's no voltage in there. So we now know that the entire high voltage system is safe. Our technician's going to remove the red danger sign and replace it for the green system deactivated sign. If you do not have a copy of these, you're able to download them from the SsangYong dealer portal. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and please make sure that you check out the full library of SsangYong e-learning videos available to view on the SsangYong dealer portal.